My best friend started a prank war, so I let karma finish it. I walked into my room and saw my girlfriend on top of my best friend, and her bra was off one shoulder. His neck was covered in lipstick and she was screaming his name at the top of her lungs. I stared at them from the doorway. Not just because of what I saw, but because of how real it looked. She was sitting on his hips and his hands were on her waist and the bed frame was splintered. My knees buckled. I stormed out of the room and practically sprinted towards the front door. "Wait!" my so-called best friend yelled. My girlfriend cackled like a goose behind him. "It was just a prank!" I didn't turn around at first because I didn't want to hear what came next, but she wrapped her ugly hands around me and flashed her phone screen in my face. On it was a video from my hidden camera in the living room, time-stamped, and it showed them setting it up, talking about which clothes would make it look real. "We thought it would be funny. You were supposed to get mad." I had to stop myself from spitting in her face. My reaction was part of the entertainment. That's when my best friend popped out from behind her. "So are we all good?" he asked with a grin, holding out his hand to dap me up. Clap. I dapped him up back. "Yeah, bro, I forgive you. You were just having fun. But her?" I then turned to my girlfriend and looked at her like she was a cheap hooker begging for some cash. She should have known better than to disrespect me like that. Her face went red and she ran out to her car. My friend Chase laughed. "You're the homie, bro. That chick was chopped anyways." He didn't know it at the time, but I was about to flip the switch on him. Except 10 times worse. For the next few days, Chase wouldn't shut up about how epic his prank was. He even posted his greatest hits on his private story, mocking me to everyone we knew, all while I was working in the shadows, slowly cooking him alive. I watched him recruit 2 of our mutual friends, overheard him at a party saying, "Wait till you see what I do next. Joey's gonna love this one." Then our mutual friend mentioned something. "Yo, Chase keeps asking if you live alone now?" He knew my grandma had just moved in 3 months ago after her heart attack. She was still prone to them. That night, Chase called. "Dude, I'ma pull up to your crib tomorrow at 2. Got something to show you." His voice had that same excited tone from before the cheating prank. "Yeah, man, 2 p.m. works. Just me and you?" I kept my voice steady. "Of course, bro. Just us." That night, I felt like a child before Christmas morning. I made sure everyone important would be around when Chase was there. My uncle, the retired EMT, my sweet grandma who could cuss out anyone and make them feel ashamed for their actions. All perfectly coming together like a jigsaw. At 1:45 p.m., I was in position. My hands were sweating with guilt, but I kept thinking about my ex's face when they revealed their prank. At 2 p.m. sharp, I heard his car. Through the window, I could see 2 figures slouched in the back seat. Of course, he brought cameras. Chase walked in checking every window, probably making sure we were alone. "Come in. I'm in the kitchen," I called out. He strutted in with that stupid grin. "Hey, bro, before I show you what I planned." Suddenly, his hand shot to his chest. His face went from smiling to pure agony in a second. "Chase?" His knees gave out and he hit the floor hard. Red foam started bubbling from his mouth, and for a split second, I forgot everything. This had to be real. Chase went through like 2 vapes a day, and now it was finally catching up to him. "Help! Somebody help!" My grandma rushed in first, and I'll never forget her face. The color drained instantly. Not again, just like Harold!" Uncle Mike burst through the door and didn't hesitate, straight into chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Chase's eyes went wide as Mike's full weight pressed down on him. Suddenly, my grandma clutched her chest and buckled to the floor. She was having a heart attack. I ran over and begged Mike to call an ambulance while tears streamed down my face. Chase tried to scream, "It's a prank! I'm fine!" But it came out muffled under my uncle's compressions. My grandma was already hyperventilating. Real tears, real pain. Someone called 911. Everything was a blur until the sound of sirens brought me back to reality. The EMTs burst through the door to find my grandmother on the floor, clutching her chest, tears streaming. Chase's mouth opened and closed like a fish, pure panic replacing that stupid grin. We all filed into the garden to give the EMTs space to work. What they told us next about Grandma made me ruin Chase's life. Forever. One of the EMTs finished securing the stretcher straps while the other packed up equipment. Zach Matsumoto, the lead EMT with his name badge visible on his chest, motioned for me to step away from the others. We walked a few feet down the garden path and he lowered his voice. "Your grandmother had a stress-induced cardiac event," he explained, pointing at his own chest to show where the damage occurred. The stress triggered an irregular heart rhythm that could have been fatal if we hadn't gotten here quickly. My stomach felt like it dropped through the ground because this wasn't just her getting scared and needing to calm down. She has actual damage to her heart rhythm, but it's manageable with medication and reduced stress going forward, he continued while pulling out a pamphlet about cardiac care. The words swirled in my head as I tried to process that Chase's stupid prank caused real, permanent harm to my grandma's heart. I could see Chase still sitting on the floor through the window, his face pale and sweaty, while Uncle Mike stood over him with his arms crossed tight against his chest. Chase started talking before I even got back inside, his words tumbling out fast and panicked about how it was supposed to be funny and just payback for my prank on him. Uncle Mike cut him off mid-sentence and asked if Chase thought giving an old woman a heart attack was some kind of joke. The tension in the room made it hard to breathe, and I felt my chest getting tight. Chase's two friends stood in the doorway looking like they wanted to melt into the floor and disappear completely. My hands were shaking as I watched the EMTs carefully lift Grandma onto the stretcher, her face so pale and small against the white sheets. She reached out and squeezed my hand weakly as they rolled her past, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying right there. Zach came back inside and addressed all of us in a stern voice that made everyone freeze. "Faking medical emergencies is dangerous and illegal in some places," he said while looking directly at Chase. "Uncle Mike's chest compressions could have cracked your ribs if he'd kept going because he was treating you like a real cardiac arrest patient." Chase's eyes went huge as he processed that he could have actually gotten hurt from his own prank. I felt this weird twist of guilt in my stomach because I set this whole thing up, even though Chase brought it on himself. Zach handed me some paperwork about Grandma's treatment and told us which hospital they were taking her to. After the ambulance pulled away with its lights flashing and Uncle Mike following in his truck, I stood alone in the kitchen with Chase's friends already gone. I went straight to my laptop and opened the folder where I stored all my camera footage. The living room camera had captured everything from earlier when Chase and his friends were setting up the prank. I downloaded the file and created a new folder on my desktop labeled Receipts in all caps. My hands moved fast across the keyboard as I organized timestamps and took screenshots of them discussing which clothes would make the fake heart attack look real. There was Chase pointing at his chest and demonstrating how he'd clutch it, his friends suggesting the red foam for extra effect, all of them laughing about my expected reaction. My anger felt cold and focused now, instead of the hot rage that made me want to punch walls earlier. I grabbed my phone and pulled up Aaron Blackwell's contact, one of our mutual friends who I knew was getting tired of Chase's behavior lately. "Can you screenshot Chase's private story posts about pranking me?" I typed out. He responded within an hour with a whole thread of images. The screenshots showed Chase mocking my reaction to the cheating prank with crying emojis and captions about how I fell for it completely. Another post promised something even better was coming soon with a devil emoji and fire emojis. Each screenshot made my jaw clench harder as I saved them to the receipts folder. My phone buzzed with Uncle Mike calling from the hospital, and I answered on the first ring. "They're admitting Grandma for observation overnight," he said, and his voice sounded exhausted. "She'll need new heart medications that aren't cheap, and they mentioned something about possible long-term monitoring." My chest got tight thinking about how we were going to afford this on top of everything else we already struggled with. "Can I come visit?" I asked while grabbing my keys off the counter. He told me to wait until morning when she'd be more stable and resting better. When Uncle Mike got home that evening, I heard his truck pull into the driveway and the heavy sound of his boots on the porch. He found me in the kitchen making a sandwich I didn't really want to eat. "You knew Chase would pull something after your prank," he said while blocking the doorway with his arms crossed. "So why did you set him up at the house where Grandma could get hurt?" His words hit me like a physical punch because he was completely right. I was so focused on getting revenge that I didn't think about collateral damage or who else might get hurt. We argued back and forth with my voice getting louder and his getting quieter until I was near tears from guilt and anger mixed together. He finally stormed off to his room and slammed the door, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my half-made sandwich. My phone lit up with a text from my ex saying she heard what happened and wanted to clear the air between us. I opened the message ready to accept an apology, but then she doubled down on how their cheating prank was harmless fun, and I overreacted to the whole thing. I stared at the message for a full minute while my thumb hovered over the keyboard. The fact that she still didn't get why it was messed up told me everything I needed to know about her character and who she really was. I blocked her number and deleted the conversation without responding. Our group chat suddenly got active with me typing out a message saying no more pranks ever because this has gone too far and someone could have died today. I watched the typing indicators appear and disappear as people read it. Chase responded with 3 laughing emojis and typed, "Bro, it was hilarious. Your face was priceless." A few people reacted with anger emojis to his message, but nobody directly called him out or said anything to support what I wrote. I realized most of them were too scared of becoming his next target to speak up against him. 2 days crawled by with me visiting Grandma at the hospital and helping Uncle Mike deal with insurance paperwork. Chase uploaded a montage video to his private story with dramatic music, playing over clips of all his greatest pranks. The video showed the cheating setup with my ex on top of him, then cut to the heart attack prank with my panicked face as I screamed for help. My reactions were the punchline of every clip while text overlays called me gullible and dramatic. The humiliation burned through me as I saw 47 people had viewed it, which was basically everyone we knew from the school and parties. My hands shook as I took screenshots of the whole video and added them to my evidence folder that kept growing bigger. I made a decision right there that this ends now through official channels instead of more revenge or online drama. I grabbed my phone and pulled up Zach Matsumoto's contact info from the card he gave me at the hospital. My finger hovered over the call button for a second before I pressed it and listened to the rings. He picked up on the third ring, and I could hear voices and radio chatter in the background like he was on shift. I explained who I was and asked if he'd be willing to give a formal statement about what happened and why faking medical emergencies is dangerous. The line went quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe he'd say no or tell me to handle it myself. But then he said yes. He'd seen too many stupid stunts go wrong, and someone needs to learn a lesson before they actually kill somebody. His voice was serious and tired, like he'd dealt with this kind of thing before. I thanked him probably 5 times, and he said to have whoever needs the statement contact him directly at the station. Hanging up, I felt less alone in this whole thing. Like I wasn't just some dramatic kid overreacting, but someone with actual support from professionals who understood. I opened my laptop and started searching for information about college policies and harassment rules. It took me almost an hour of clicking through different pages on the school website before I found the student conduct section. Turns out our college has policies about harassment and creating unsafe situations even if it happens off campus, as long as students are involved. My heart started beating faster as I read through the descriptions because Chase's pattern of escalating pranks fit almost perfectly. I clicked the link to file a formal report and started filling out the online form with dates, times, and detailed descriptions of everything that happened. I attached all my evidence, the camera footage, the screenshots, the medical records, and Zach's contact information. The form asked me to explain how this affected me, and I wrote about my grandmother's real heart attack and the ongoing medical costs and stress. When I hit submit, a confirmation page popped up saying someone from the campus conduct office would contact me within 48 hours. I closed my laptop and sat back feeling drained, but also relieved that I'd actually done something concrete instead of just being angry. That evening, Uncle Mike's truck pulled into the driveway, and I heard him helping Grandma out of the passenger seat. I rushed to the door and saw her moving slowly with a white pharmacy bag in one hand. She looked smaller somehow, like the hospital stay had shrunk her down. Uncle Mike carried in another bag full of prescription bottles and printed instructions about stress reduction and follow-up appointments. Grandma hugged me tight and whispered that she was okay, and I shouldn't worry about her. But I could see the tiredness in her eyes that wasn't there before, a kind of worn-out look that told me something had changed permanently in her health. We got her settled on the couch, and Uncle Mike spread out all the medication bottles on the coffee table while reading the instructions out loud. There were pills for blood pressure, pills for heart rhythm, pills to prevent clots, and instructions about when to take each one. I felt my chest get tight thinking about how this was going to be her life now because of Chase's stupid prank. The next morning, I woke up to an email notification on my phone from someone named Evelyn Reese at the campus conduct office. She was asking me to come in for an intake meeting and to bring any witnesses or evidence I had available. My hands shook a little as I read it because this was really happening now, not just something I filed and forgot about. I forwarded the email to Aaron with a message asking if he'd be willing to share those DMs where Chase bragged about his pranks. His response came back within 5 minutes saying he'd been wanting to say something, but didn't know how, and yes, he'd help however he could. I texted back thanking him, and we set up a time to meet before my appointment with Evelyn. 2 days later, I walked into the Student Services building and found Evelyn's office on the 3rd floor. She was a woman in her 40s with glasses and a kind but serious face. She shook my hand and gestured for me to sit down across from her desk. Evelyn walked me through the Student Code of Conduct, pointing to specific sections about harassment, creating unsafe situations and patterns of targeted behavior. She explained that possible outcomes could range anywhere from probation to suspension, depending on what the investigation found. Her voice got a little more cautious when she warned me that outcomes might be modest, since the incident happened off campus and wasn't directly on the school property. But then she added that the pattern of behavior I'd documented and the serious medical consequence really strengthened my case. I left her office feeling validated, but trying not to get my hopes up too high because I knew these processes could go either way. Aaron met me at the coffee shop across the street, and we grabbed a table in the back corner away from other people. He pulled out his phone and started showing me DMs where Chase specifically talked about wanting to break me with increasingly intense pranks. One message said I embarrassed him by forgiving him too easily after the cheating prank, and he needed to do something that would make me lose it completely. Reading Chase's actual words about planning to destroy me made my stomach turn. Aaron made me promise to keep his name confidential if possible because he was worried about social fallout and losing other friends. I promised and thanked him for risking so much to do the right thing, and I realized he was putting himself in a tough spot just to help me get justice. Over the next few days, Grandma settled into a new routine at home that revolved around her medications and doctor's orders. I helped her set up a system with pill boxes organized by day and time so she wouldn't miss any doses. We put a blood pressure monitor on the kitchen counter and taped instructions to the fridge about warning signs to watch for. I found a comfortable recliner chair at a thrift store and set it up in the living room where she could rest and watch her shows without having to climb stairs. The whole house felt different now, quieter and more careful, like we were all walking on eggshells trying not to cause her any stress. I spent an afternoon researching civil attorneys and found one named Craig Williamson who offered free initial consultations. I called his office and scheduled a meeting to ask about recovering Grandma's medical costs from Chase. Craig was a middle-aged guy with a cluttered desk and a straightforward way of talking. He explained that small claims court could work for amounts under $10,000, but I'd need to prove that Chase's actions directly caused the harm. The EMT statement and medical records should cover that part, he said. Then he warned me it would be a hassle, and even if I won, Chase might not have the money to actually pay the judgment. I left his office with mixed feelings because it seemed like a lot of work for an uncertain payoff, but at least it was an option. That night I was doing homework in my room when I heard a knock at the front door. I looked out the window and saw Chase standing on the porch with his phone held up recording. My blood started boiling as I walked to the door and opened it just enough to see him. He started talking about wanting to make an apology video for his channel, but I shut the door in his face before he could finish his first sentence. Through the window, I watched him stand there for a minute looking confused and annoyed. Then he yelled something about me being dramatic and walked back to his car. The temptation to blast him all over social media was so strong I could feel my fingers itching to type out a post. But I reminded myself that formal channels were the smarter play, and posting online would just muddy everything up. The next morning, Erin forwarded me screenshots that made me see red all over again. They showed my ex's DMs to someone else where she admitted the cheating prank was partly about getting attention and views for social media, not just a joke between friends. The messages showed her literally calculating how to make it look real enough to get a strong reaction out of me. She talked about camera angles and what clothes would be most convincing. A few people in our friend circle must have seen the screenshots too, because suddenly my phone started blowing up with apology texts from people who thought I'd overreacted to the whole situation. Reading those messages felt good in a petty way, but mostly I just felt tired of all the drama and ready for this to be over. The next morning, my inbox had a new email from Evelyn with the subject line, "Formal Statement Request, Student Conduct Case Number 2847. I clicked it open and scanned through the professional language asking me to provide a detailed written account of Chase's behavior pattern, the prank incident, and its aftermath. Plus, she needed statements from Uncle Mike and Zach within 5 business days. I grabbed my laptop and started typing immediately, my fingers moving fast across the keys as I laid out every single detail with dates and timestamps pulled from my phone calendar. The cheating prank on October 3rd at 6:47 p.m., Chase's private story posts on October 4th, 5th, and 7th, showing him mocking my reaction. The party on October 9th where I overheard him planning something bigger. His phone call on October 11th at 9:23 p.m. arranging to come over. The prank itself on October 12th at 2:04 p.m. when everything went wrong. I wrote for 3 hours straight, my back aching from hunching over the keyboard, until I had a 6-page document with every relevant fact I could remember. Then I called Uncle Mike and asked if he'd write his statement about performing CPR on someone faking an emergency while Grandma was having a real one. He was quiet for a moment before agreeing, but then he made me promise this was about holding Chase accountable for endangering people, not just getting revenge for the cheating prank. I promised and meant it, even though part of me still wanted Chase to suffer the way I suffered. I hit send on my statement at 11:47 p.m. and collapsed into bed feeling drained, but like I'd actually done something productive instead of just being angry. 2 days later, I was eating breakfast when my phone buzzed with another email from Evelyn, and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. The subject line said, "Cross-complaint filed, response required," and I knew it was bad. I read through Chase's version of events where he claimed I orchestrated an ambush by lying about being alone and deliberately arranging for Uncle Mike to be there so his prank would backfire. He painted himself as the victim of my manipulation, saying I knew he was planning something and set a trap to make him look bad and get him in trouble. My hands started shaking as I read his twisted logic, where somehow faking a heart attack was just harmless fun. But me having family members at my own house was calculated entrapment. The rage built up so fast I had to put my phone down and walk away before I threw it across the room. I paced around the kitchen for 10 minutes doing breathing exercises Grandma taught me until I could think clearly enough to respond. Then I sat back down and started drafting a rebuttal with evidence that Chase called me saying he had something to show me, not that he was coming to prank me, so I had no reason to think I needed to set anything up. I attached the call log showing he initiated contact and screenshots of his own messages, saying he wanted to surprise me with something. The whole process of documenting his lies made my blood pressure spike, but I kept my response professional and fact-based instead of emotional. That night I couldn't sleep, lying in bed staring at the ceiling while my brain spiraled through everything that happened. The truth was, I did technically set Chase up by making sure Uncle Mike and Grandma were around when I suspected he might try something. I planned a revenge prank just like he did, and maybe if I hadn't done that, Grandma wouldn't have been there to witness his fake heart attack and have a real one herself. The guilt ate at me until around 3 a.m., when I couldn't take it anymore and got up to pace around my room. But then I forced myself to think it through logically instead of emotionally. Chase knew Grandma lived with me because our mutual friend mentioned he'd been asking about it. He chose to fake a medical emergency in a house where an elderly woman with heart problems lived. That decision was on him, not on me for having my family in their own home. I couldn't control what he chose to do. Only how I responded afterward and pursuing formal accountability through proper channels was the right response. The next day, I looked up therapists through the campus health center website and found one named Adriana, who specialized in conflict resolution and trauma processing. I called and got an appointment for that same afternoon because someone had just canceled. Her office was in the Student Services building, a small room with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that immediately made me feel less on edge. I sat down and started explaining everything from the beginning, the whole prank war and how it escalated and what happened to Grandma, and Adriana just listened without interrupting or judging. When I finished, she helped me separate what I was actually responsible for from what Chase chose to do, explaining that I could acknowledge my part in escalating things while still holding him accountable for his dangerous actions. She gave me tools for managing anger without letting it control my decisions, like the 5-minute rule where I had to wait 5 minutes before responding to anything that made me mad. Walking out of that session, I felt physically lighter, like someone had lifted a weight off my shoulders by validating that I could be partly wrong and still deserve accountability from others. A few days later, Uncle Mike knocked on my bedroom door early in the morning and asked if I wanted breakfast. We sat at the kitchen table with eggs and toast between us while he apologized for being so harsh after the incident, saying he was scared about his mother's health and angry about the whole situation, and took it out on me when really Chase was the one who endangered her. He told me he'd support whatever legal or institutional process I wanted to pursue, as long as I promised no more revenge pranks or online drama that could make things worse. We shook hands across the table, and I felt like my family was solid again, like we were on the same team instead of fighting each other. That afternoon, I got an email from Zach with a detailed professional memo attached, explaining how fake medical emergencies waste ambulance resources that could be needed for real cases, traumatize bystanders who think they're witnessing someone die, risk serious injury from unnecessary medical treatment, like broken ribs from CPR, and create massive liability issues for everyone involved. He included cost estimates showing the ambulance call and ER visit from that day totaled over $3,000 even with insurance. The professional documentation made my case feel more legitimate and less like petty college drama between friends. I forwarded the memo to both Evelyn and Craig with a thank you note, feeling like I finally had real evidence instead of just my word against Chase's. Later that night, I opened a new post on my phone and started typing out everything Chase did with links to all the receipts I'd collected over the past few weeks. My finger hovered over the share button for a solid 10 minutes while I imagined the satisfaction of everyone seeing the truth and taking my side. But then I remembered Adriana's advice about choosing my battles and Craig's warning that posting publicly could muddy the legal case by making it look like harassment from both sides. I saved the post as a draft and closed the app, feeling proud of my self-control, even though part of me desperately wanted the validation of public support and watching Chase get dragged in the comments. The next morning, Chase posted a new video doing a mock apology where he put on a sad face and fake cried while saying, "Sorry, Grandma had a little heart problem from his epic prank." The comments were full of laughing emojis and people calling it savage and saying he was hilarious. I took screenshots immediately and sent them to Evelyn with a message explaining this showed zero remorse and continued harassment even while under investigation. Then I had to physically walk away from my phone and go outside before I did something stupid like commenting or making my own response video. Aaron texted me that afternoon saying one of Chase's small sponsors, some energy drink company called Bolt Energy, had quietly dropped him after getting complaints about his behavior from people who saw the prank videos. It wasn't a huge deal since Chase barely made any real money from his content anyway, maybe a few $100s a month in free products and small payments, but it was the first tangible consequence he'd faced beyond the conduct investigation. I felt a small spark of satisfaction reading the text, but reminded myself this wasn't over yet, and I needed to stay focused on the formal processes instead of celebrating small wins. The next day, Evelyn sent an email saying the conduct office had issued interim no-contact orders, meaning Chase and I couldn't interact directly or through third parties while the investigation continued, and violation of the order could result in immediate suspension. The relief hit me so hard I actually teared up reading it, like I could finally breathe without constantly waiting for the next attack or prank or harassment. I forwarded the email to Uncle Mike and Grandma so they'd know Chase wasn't legally allowed to come near the house or contact any of us, and Uncle Mike responded saying he'd call the police immediately if Chase showed up. 2 days after the no-contact order went into effect, I was scrolling through my phone during a study break when a notification popped up. Some account with a random string of numbers and letters had tagged me in a post. My stomach dropped when I opened it, because there on my screen were photos of my car parked in our driveway, shots of the front of our house with the address visible, and even a picture of me walking to class that someone must have taken from across the quad. The caption said something about how people who ruin other people's lives deserve what's coming to them. My hands went cold and started shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. I immediately took screenshots of everything, the profile, the post, the photos, all of it. Then I called the non-emergency police line because this felt way too serious to ignore. The officer who answered listened to my explanation and told me to document everything with screenshots and timestamps, then come down to file a formal report so they'd have it on record in case anything else happened. I spent the next hour doing exactly that, adding the new folder to my growing evidence collection that was starting to take up a whole section of my laptop. The process felt like a part-time job at this point, constantly documenting and organizing proof of harassment, but I knew it mattered for the legal case. After I filed the police report, I forwarded copies to both Craig and Evelyn so they'd know about the escalation and could add it to their files. Craig didn't waste any time responding. 3 days later, he sent me a copy of the formal demand letter he'd mailed to Chase. I sat at my desk reading through it and felt this wave of relief wash over me because seeing everything laid out in official legal language made it feel real and serious in a way my own complaints never had. The letter requested exactly $4,800 to cover Grandma's medical costs that insurance didn't pay, immediate removal of all prank content featuring me from every platform Chase used, and a cease and desist on any future harassment or contact. It explained in clear terms that Chase's actions directly caused measurable harm and that we had documentation proving the connection between his prank and Grandma's cardiac event. The tone was professional but firm, not angry or emotional, just stating facts and consequences. At the bottom it said Chase had 14 days to respond in writing before we'd file in small claims court. I read it 3 times, feeling more protected with each pass. This wasn't just me complaining anymore. This was a lawyer telling Chase he'd crossed legal lines and needed to make it right. I saved the PDF to my evidence folder and sent Craig a thank you email telling him how much this meant to my family. The next afternoon, Aaron texted me with news that made my day even better. Apparently Chase's landlord had somehow gotten a copy of the conduct office complaint, maybe through the college or maybe someone sent it anonymously, and the landlord sent Chase a warning letter about violating his lease terms. Aaron said the letter mentioned creating disturbances and safety issues that could affect other tenants and warned that any future problems could result in eviction. I asked Aaron how he knew all this, and he said Chase had completely lost it in our old group chat, posting these long rants about how everyone was against him. And this whole situation was blown way out of proportion for what was just a harmless prank. I opened the group chat to look, and sure enough, there were like 5 messages from Chase all in a row, each one more defensive than the last. He kept saying people were overreacting and trying to ruin his life over nothing. What struck me most was that absolutely nobody responded to him. The chat just sat there with his messages in total silence from everyone else. That silence felt louder than any argument could have been. People were done defending him or making excuses. Even his closest friends weren't jumping in to back him up anymore. I took screenshots of the whole exchange and added them to my folder, then muted the group chat so I wouldn't see if he posted anything else. Things got even more interesting a few days later when Miguel, one of the guys who'd helped Chase with his pranks, apparently had some kind of falling out with him. Aaron sent me a link to Miguel's social media where he'd posted a bunch of behind-the-scenes clips from their prank planning sessions. I watched them with my jaw hanging open because Chase was so much worse than I'd even realized. In one video, Chase was literally saying he wanted to destroy me and make me lose it completely, that he wanted to see me break down and cry on camera so he could use it for content. Another clip showed them calculating exactly how to make the fake heart attack look real enough to traumatize me, discussing which sound effects would be most convincing and how to time everything for maximum impact. The videos made it crystal clear that this wasn't just friends messing around or pranks that went too far. This was calculated psychological warfare designed to cause maximum harm for views and entertainment. I felt sick watching them, but also weirdly validated because now there was proof of his intentions. Within hours of Miguel posting the videos, I noticed several people who defended Chase before suddenly went quiet. A few even posted vague things about not really knowing what was going on behind the scenes. The social tide was finally turning and people were seeing Chase for who he really was. My ex decided to make her move around the same time, probably seeing which way the wind was blowing. She posted this long statement on her social media, saying she wanted to distance herself from Chase and clarify that she didn't know his pranks would escalate to dangerous levels. She made it sound like she'd been an innocent bystander who just participated in one harmless joke and had no idea Chase was capable of causing real harm. I read through her post and recognized it immediately for what it was: pure self-preservation with zero actual accountability or apology to me. She never mentioned that she'd actively participated in planning the cheating prank, never acknowledged how messed up it was to fake infidelity as entertainment, never said sorry for her part in starting this whole chain of events. But I watched as her comments section filled up with people who weren't buying her innocent act. Multiple people pointed out that she'd been laughing and celebrating when they revealed their prank, that she'd known exactly what she was doing, that being sorry now didn't erase her actions. Some comments straight up called her complicit in everything that came after. The petty part of me enjoyed seeing her get dragged, but mostly I just felt exhausted by all the drama and wished everyone would move on with their lives. The drama stopped feeling distant and abstract one evening, about a week later when Grandma had another scare. I was in my room working on an assignment when I heard her call out from the living room. I ran in to find her clutching her chest with this panicked look on her face, saying her heart was racing and she felt dizzy. My own heart started pounding as I helped her sit down and grabbed her blood pressure monitor. The reading was high, not dangerously high, but definitely elevated, and I could see her pulse jumping in her neck. I called 911 immediately because after everything that happened, I wasn't taking any chances with her health. The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes and checked her vitals while asking questions about her symptoms and medical history. They ran an EKG right there in our living room and said her heart rhythm looked okay, but recommended we follow up with her cardiologist soon. One of the paramedics told us it was likely anxiety-related given the recent trauma and stress, but to watch for warning signs and keep her environment as calm as possible. After they left and Grandma was settled in bed, I lay in my own bed staring at the ceiling, feeling this fresh wave of anger at Chase. Grandma's health was permanently affected by his stupid prank, and no amount of legal consequences or social fallout would change that fact. She'd have to deal with anxiety and medication and monitoring for the rest of her life because he thought traumatizing people were funny content. That night, lying there angry and unable to sleep, I made a decision. The next morning, I sat down and consciously chose to step back from social media and stop checking what Chase posted or who was talking about the situation. I'd been spending hours every day monitoring his accounts, reading comments, tracking who said what about the drama, and it was eating up my time and mental energy. I gathered all my evidence files, every screenshot and video and document I'd collected, and sent them to both Evelyn and Craig with a message saying I was handing everything over to them to handle while I focused on classes and taking care of Grandma. Then I logged out of most of my social media apps and deleted them from my phone's home screen so I wouldn't be tempted to check constantly. When I saw Adriana for therapy that week, I told her about my decision, and she said it showed real growth, that I was choosing peace and trusting the process instead of needing to control every part of the narrative. She pointed out that formal channels were handling the accountability part, and I didn't need to fight every battle on social media to prove my point. Walking out of her office, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, like I'd put down a heavy backpack I'd been carrying around. Aaron called me a few days later with news that honestly made me emotional. He said he'd decided to testify at the conduct hearing, even though it might cost him some friendships in our social circle. I asked him if he was sure because I knew people might turn on him for speaking out against Chase, and he said someone had to stand up to bullies even when it was uncomfortable. His voice was steady and determined, like he'd really thought it through and made peace with the consequences. I felt tears starting in my eyes because I'd felt so alone in this fight, and having someone willing to risk social fallout to back me up meant everything. I promised him I'd protect his identity as much as possible in the hearing and thanked him probably a dozen times until he laughed and told me to stop. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about how this whole situation had shown me who my real friends were, the ones who'd stand up for what's right even when it cost them something. About a week after that conversation, I got an official email from the conduct office. My stomach did a flip when I saw the subject line about my complaint against Chase. I opened it to find detailed information about the hearing date, which was set for 3 weeks out. The email explained evidence rules, what to expect during the hearing, our rights to bring support people, and the possible outcomes. Reading through it all made everything feel suddenly very real and official. This wasn't just emails and complaints anymore. This was an actual formal hearing where Chase would have to answer for his actions in front of a panel. My hands were shaking a little as I read through the procedures and requirements. That evening at dinner, I asked Uncle Mike if he'd be willing to come with me to the hearing as my support person. He didn't even hesitate, just said of course he would and that we'd make sure everything was documented properly. Having him agree immediately made me feel more confident about facing the hearing. The day after I got the hearing notification, something happened that would have made me laugh if it wasn't so ridiculous. One of our mutual acquaintances, someone who'd stayed neutral through all the drama, texted me saying Chase had asked him to reach out. Apparently Chase wanted to settle this whole thing if I'd drop the complaints and let him keep some of the prank content up for his channel. I actually laughed out loud reading the message, like genuine surprised laughter at the pure audacity. After everything that happened, after Grandma's heart attack and the medical bills and the harassment and the intimidation, Chase thought he could negotiate to keep profiting off content that featured me getting traumatized. I texted the acquaintance back and told him to inform Chase that any settlement discussions go through my attorney and would involve full accountability, not negotiation about what content he gets to keep for views. Then I forwarded the whole text exchange to Craig, so he'd have documentation of Chase trying to circumvent proper channels. The entitlement was almost impressive in how completely tone-deaf it was. Craig responded to Chase's settlement attempt within a day, sending formal counterterms through email that he copied me on so I could see exactly what he was proposing. The terms were clear and non-negotiable. Chase pays $4,800 in 6 monthly installments of $800 each, removes every single piece of content featuring me from all his platforms within 72 hours with time-stamped proof of deletion, and posts a genuine apology video taking full responsibility without any monetization or sponsor mentions. I read through Craig's email 3 times because seeing it all laid out in official legal language made it feel real and serious in a way the drama never had before. Chase's lawyer responded 2 days later calling the terms excessive and claiming the medical causation wasn't as clear-cut as we were presenting it. But the response didn't outright refuse, which Craig said was actually a good sign, because it meant they were at least considering it, instead of dismissing everything completely. The back and forth started with Chase's side trying to negotiate down the payment amount and asking to keep some of the prank content up if he blurred my face, which made me actually laugh out loud at the nerve because he still thought this was about his channel views and not about the real harm he caused. Craig shut that down immediately and reiterated that the terms were firm, no negotiation on content removal or the apology requirements, though he indicated slight flexibility on payment timeline if Chase could prove legitimate financial hardship. I spent those days checking my email obsessively waiting for updates, refreshing constantly, even though I knew lawyers don't work that fast, and everything takes forever in legal processes. About a week into this negotiation stalemate, I ended up at a party that Aaron invited me to without mentioning Chase would be there. I walked in and immediately spotted Chase across the room, talking to some people from our old friend group, and my stomach dropped because I hadn't seen him face to face since the no-contact order got issued. He saw me at the same time and his whole face changed, going from laughing to this weird mix of anger and something that almost looked like guilt. I turned to leave, but he started walking toward me with his hands up in this non-threatening gesture that felt completely fake. He got close enough that I could hear him trying to talk, saying we should squash this whole thing and move on like adults, acting like we were still friends who just had a disagreement instead of what actually happened. Every part of me wanted to tell him off right there in front of everyone, to list out everything he'd done, and how Grandma was still dealing with heart medication because of his stupid prank, but I remembered Evelyn's warning about the no-contact order and how any interaction could mess up my case. I walked away without saying a single word, just turned around and headed straight for the door, while my heart pounded and my hands shook from the effort of staying quiet. Aaron caught up with me outside and apologized for not warning me Chase would be there, saying he didn't know until he'd already invited me and felt terrible about putting me in that position. 2 other people who'd seen the whole interaction came out after me and said they respected how I handled it, that walking away took more strength than going off on him would have, and one of them mentioned they'd lost respect for Chase after seeing how he acted like nothing serious had happened. The conduct hearing got scheduled for a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Student Services building. I showed up at 9 a.m. with Uncle Mike as my support person, both of us dressed in button-down shirts because Craig said looking professional mattered even in student conduct proceedings. The room had a long table where 3 panel members sat with folders in front of them, and there were 2 smaller tables facing them, where Chase and I would sit with our respective support people. Evelyn was there to facilitate but not make decisions, and she explained the process while we waited for Chase to arrive. He walked in 5 minutes late with someone I didn't recognize who he introduced as his student advisor, and he wouldn't make eye contact with me the entire time we were setting up. The panel chair explained we'd each get 20 minutes to present our case with evidence, then they'd ask questions, then we'd have brief closing statements before they deliberated. I went first because I filed the complaint, and my hands were shaking so bad when I stood up that I had to set my notes on the table to read them. I walked through everything starting with the cheating prank that began this whole cycle, showed the timestamps from Chase's private story posts where he mocked my reactions, and promised something bigger was coming, presented the DMs Aaron had provided showing Chase specifically planned to break me with increasingly intense pranks. Then I got to the heart attack prank itself and had to pause to steady my voice before explaining how Chase knew my grandmother lived with me, knew she had a history of heart problems, and chose to fake a medical emergency anyway. I submitted Zach's detailed memo about the dangers of fake emergencies and the specific risks Chase created, included the medical records showing Grandma's stress-induced cardiac event was real, and required ongoing treatment, and finished with my timeline showing how Chase's pattern of escalating harassment directly led to serious harm. My voice shook through most of it, but I got through everything I needed to say. And when I explained how Uncle Mike had to perform CPR on someone faking an emergency while my grandmother was having a real one, I saw one of the panel members write something down with an underline. Uncle Mike's written statement got submitted as evidence, and the panel spent a few minutes reviewing all the documents I'd provided while I sat there trying to control my breathing and not look at Chase. Chase's turn came next, and his whole defense centered on the idea that we'd always pranked each other, so this was just part of our friendship dynamic. His student advisor helped him present his case, and they tried to paint the whole situation as a prank war between friends that accidentally went too far, not targeted harassment or malicious behavior. Chase claimed he had no way of knowing the prank would trigger a real medical emergency because he thought my grandmother was healthier than she actually was, and he kept emphasizing that it was supposed to be funny and he never intended any real harm. His lawyer tried to frame him as just a dumb college kid who made a mistaken judgment, not someone who deliberately created an unsafe situation. And they showed some old text between us joking about pranks to prove we both participated in this kind of behavior before. The panel started asking questions that got increasingly pointed about reasonable foreseeability and whether any reasonable person would think faking a heart attack around an elderly woman with known heart problems might cause harm. Chase stumbled through his answers, admitting he knew about Grandma's previous heart attack, but claiming he didn't think his prank was serious enough to trigger anything. And when they asked why he brought cameras to film my reaction, if it wasn't about humiliating me publicly, he didn't have a good response. One panel member asked directly if he'd considered the potential consequences before doing the prank, and Chase said he thought I'd just get mad, and then we'd laugh about it later, which made the panel member frown and write more notes. The whole thing lasted about 90 minutes total, and by the end I felt completely drained from the tension and emotional weight of having to relive everything in official proceedings. 4 days later, I got an email from Evelyn with the subject line, "Conduct Case Decision," and my hands went cold opening it. The panel found Chase responsible for harassment and creating an unsafe environment, which meant they believed my evidence and agreed his actions crossed the line from pranks to actual harmful behavior. His sentence included conduct probation for 1 full year, meaning any other violations would result in immediate suspension. 40 hours of community service that had to be completed by end of semester, mandatory attendance at a conflict resolution workshop, and a requirement to post a formal written apology taking responsibility for his actions without blaming me or minimizing what happened. He wasn't getting expelled, which part of me had hoped for, but the decision noted that any future violations would result in immediate suspension proceedings and possible expulsion depending on severity. I sat at my desk reading and rereading the email, trying to figure out how I felt about it. On one hand, it was real accountability, and Chase would face actual consequences that would affect his college record and require real work from him. On the other hand, it didn't feel like enough given what happened to Grandma, the ongoing medical bills, and how his actions had completely blown up my social circle and caused months of stress. Uncle Mike said it was a solid outcome and showed the system worked at least somewhat, and Grandma told me she was proud I'd stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. I forwarded the decision to Craig so he'd have it for the civil case and saved a copy in my evidence folder that had grown to like 50 documents at this point. Chase refused to accept Craig's settlement terms even after the conduct decision, sending back a response through his lawyer that basically said he'd already been punished enough through the school and shouldn't have to pay medical bills on top of everything else. Craig called me to discuss next steps and said we could either drop it or file in small claims court, and I asked what he recommended. He explained small claims would cost me $85 in filing fees that I might not recover even if we won. The process could take months to get a court date, and Chase might not have money to actually pay, even if the judge ruled in our favor. But he also said the medical records and EMT statement made our case pretty strong, and sometimes the threat of court plus the hassle of defending himself would push Chase to settle anyway. I talked it over with Uncle Mike that night, and we decided to file because the principle mattered more than the money at this point, and I needed Chase to face real financial consequences for what his actions cost our family. Uncle Mike covered the $85 filing fee and told me it was worth it to see this through properly, and the next week we submitted all the paperwork to the county courthouse, requesting $4,800 in damages for Grandma's medical costs. The clerk told us it would be several months before we got a hearing date because the small claims docket was backed up, and we should expect to wait at least until spring semester for any movement on the case. Money stress hit hard over the next few weeks as Grandma's medication costs kept adding up, and I was spending so much time dealing with legal stuff that my hours at my part-time job got cut. The prescriptions alone were running about $200 a month even with insurance, plus she needed follow-up appointments with her cardiologist every 6 weeks that had co-pays. And I was trying to balance school and work and taking care of her while also managing all the documentation for the court case. I picked up extra weekend shifts at work doing inventory and stocking, which paid a bit more, and I cut back on everything non-essential like eating out or buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Uncle Mike helped with some of the bills, but I could see the financial strain on him too since he was already supporting himself and contributing to household expenses, and I hated that Chase's stupid prank was affecting our whole family's finances months after it happened. Some nights I lay awake doing math in my head, trying to figure out how to make everything work. And the stress of it made me understand why people sometimes just give up on pursuing justice, because the cost of fighting feels like it's not worth it even when you're right. 2 months after filing the small claims case, we finally got a notice about a court-ordered mediation date set for 3 weeks out. Craig explained this was standard procedure, where a judge would review both sides and try to get us to settle before going to actual trial, and most small claims cases settled at mediation, because going to trial was a bigger hassle for everyone involved. The mediation happened in a small room at the courthouse, with the judge sitting at the head of a table and Chase with his lawyer on one side while Craig and I sat on the other. The judge spent about 20 minutes reviewing all the submitted evidence, including the medical records, Zach's statement, the conduct hearing decision, and our documentation of costs. Then he started asking Chase's lawyer some pretty direct questions about liability. He pointed out that the medical records clearly showed a stress-induced cardiac event that happened during Chase's prank. The EMT statement confirmed the direct causal link. And the conduct hearing had already found Chase responsible for creating an unsafe situation. So what exactly was their defense against paying the medical costs his actions caused? Chase's lawyer tried to argue about shared responsibility since I'd set up my own revenge prank, but the judge shut that down, saying my setup didn't involve faking medical emergencies around vulnerable people, and the harm was clearly one-sided. The tension in that small room was thick enough that I could barely breathe, and I watched Chase shift in his seat, looking increasingly uncomfortable, as the judge basically told his lawyer they'd probably lose if this went to trial, and it would cost them more in legal fees than just settling now. Chase agreed to a settlement after his lawyer took him outside for a private conversation that lasted about 15 minutes. The terms ended up being $3,200 paid in 8 monthly installments of $400, removal of all content featuring me from every platform within 48 hours, with proof of deletion sent to Craig's office, and a written apology that had to be posted publicly on Chase's main social media without any ads or monetization enabled. It was less money than we'd asked for, but Craig said it was actually a solid win given the circumstances. And the hassle of going to trial, and the important thing was, Chase was facing real financial consequences, plus having to publicly admit what he did wrong. I signed the settlement agreement feeling exhausted, but relieved that this part was finally over, and Craig explained the payment schedule was legally binding, so if Chase missed any payments, we could take him back to court for the full amount plus penalties. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt like I could finally breathe properly for the first time in months, knowing that Chase couldn't just walk away from what he'd done without it costing him something real. Chase had to sell some of his camera equipment and gaming setup to make the first $400 payment on time, and Aaron sent me a screenshot about a week later showing Chase complaining about it in a private group chat. The message showed Chase ranting about having to sell his good microphone and one of his monitors, saying it was unfair he had to pay for an accident when I was the one who set him up in the first place. There was something satisfying about knowing his actions cost him something real and tangible, even though it didn't undo any of the harm or bring back the months of stress and medical problems Grandma dealt with. The money went straight to paying down the medical bills that had been piling up, and seeing that balance decrease felt like at least some kind of justice, even if it wasn't the complete accountability I'd wanted. Uncle Mike said sometimes you have to accept that partial justice is better than no justice, and the important thing was, Chase couldn't just prank someone into a medical emergency and walk away like nothing happened. That night I opened my laptop and pulled up the drafted post I'd been holding onto for 3 months, the one with all the screenshots and timestamps and a detailed timeline of everything Chase did. My finger hovered over the delete button for a solid minute because part of me still wanted to blast him publicly and get that validation from everyone seeing I was right. But then I thought about everything that had already happened through the proper channels and how posting this wouldn't change anything except drag me back into the drama. I hit delete and watched the draft disappear from my saved items. At my next therapy session, Adriana said this showed real growth because I'd moved from needing external validation to finding closure through actual accountability. It felt weird but good to let go of that anger I'd been carrying around like a weight in my chest, even though I knew part of me would always be mad about what happened to Grandma. The relief was immediate, like I could finally stop checking my phone every 5 minutes to see who was talking about the situation. 3 weeks later, I drove Grandma to her cardiology follow-up and sat in the waiting room flipping through old magazines while she got checked out. The doctor called me back in after the exam and explained that her heart rhythm had stabilized on the medication and her prognosis was good as long as she maintained low stress and healthy habits. The relief hit me so hard I had to blink back tears right there in his office while he went over the follow-up schedule. Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand with her thin fingers and told me she was proud of how I handled everything, choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. Her words made my throat tight because I knew how close I'd come to making everything worse with my revenge plan. We stopped for ice cream on the way home, and she insisted on paying even though I tried to argue, saying she wanted to celebrate good news with her grandson. That weekend, Uncle Mike asked me to sit down at the kitchen table because he needed to talk about something important. His face was serious, and I braced myself thinking maybe Grandma's results weren't as good as they seemed. But instead he said he was setting a clear family boundary going forward. No more prank culture, no revenge schemes, no manufactured drama, period. If someone wronged me, I either handled it through proper channels or walked away. But I didn't create situations that could blow up in everyone's faces like what happened with Chase. I agreed completely because I'd learned that lesson the hard way and never wanted to see Grandma on the floor clutching her chest again. He seemed satisfied with my response and clapped me on the shoulder before getting up to start dinner, the tension dissolving into normal family routine. A few days later, I got a notification that my ex had tried to add me back on social media with a message saying enough time had passed and we should move on. I stared at the request for maybe 10 seconds before hitting decline without typing any response. The anger and hurt from her betrayal felt like it happened to a different person, someone younger and more naive who thought pranks were harmless fun. I didn't care about her anymore or what she was doing or whether she felt bad about what happened. Leaving that chapter closed felt right, and I went back to scrolling through my feed without a second thought. Aaron started getting some backlash for testifying at the conduct hearing, losing a few friends who stayed loyal to Chase and thought he was a snitch. I made sure to text him regularly and invite him to hang out with some of my other friends who actually appreciated people with integrity. We grabbed food one afternoon, and he told me he didn't regret speaking up because knowing he did the right thing helped him sleep at night, even if it cost him socially. I introduced him to a couple guys from my study group who were solid people, and they hit it off talking about video games and classes. Watching Aaron laugh and relax around people who respected him made me feel good about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. The conduct office sent me an email a month later asking to verify that Chase had completed all his requirements, including posting the apology video. I clicked the link they provided and watched the whole thing. Chase sitting in front of a plain wall reading from a script with no jokes or edits, taking full responsibility for faking a medical emergency and causing harm to my grandmother. The video had like 30 views, and the comments were mostly people calling him out for being fake or saying it was too little too late. I confirmed to the conduct office that yes, he'd posted it as mandated, then closed the tab and went on with my day. The important thing wasn't whether people believed his apology, it was that he had to publicly admit what he did wrong and face consequences. My friend group basically split down the middle over the next few weeks, some people thinking I took things too far by getting Chase in legal trouble, and others respecting that I stood up for my family. I ended up with a smaller circle, but they were people I actually trusted and who shared my values about accountability and not treating serious stuff like entertainment. Quality over quantity became my new approach, and honestly, the drama-free friendships were so much more peaceful than constantly wondering who was going to prank who next. We hung out doing normal stuff like playing basketball and watching movies instead of trying to one-up each other with elaborate schemes. By month 4 of the payment plan, Grandma's medical bills were mostly covered between Chase's payments, the insurance money that finally came through, and contributions from Uncle Mike and some other family members. There was still some debt hanging over us, but it was manageable, and not the crushing weight it felt like when the bills first started arriving. I'd learned to budget better and actually had a small emergency fund saved up from picking up extra shifts at work. Seeing those numbers in my bank account made me feel more secure, and like I could handle whatever came next without panicking. Therapy became a regular thing for me after that. Not just crisis management, but actual work on boundaries and communication, and not letting anger control my decisions. Adriana helped me recognize patterns where I let things build up instead of addressing them early, like how I should have shut down the prank war with Chase way before it escalated to dangerous levels. I wasn't perfect at it and still struggled sometimes with wanting to lash out when people disrespected me, but I was getting better at pausing and thinking through consequences. I hadn't posted a single subtweet or vague status in months, and that felt like real progress. There was this moment one evening where I was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and Grandma was in her chair laughing at something on TV, and Uncle Mike was making dinner, and it hit me that we'd found a new normal. The house felt calm and safe again in a way it hadn't since before Chase's prank. It wasn't the same as before because Grandma's health had changed, and I was more cautious about who I trusted and let into my life, but it was good in its own way. The smell of Uncle Mike's cooking filled the kitchen, and Grandma called out asking what we were having, and I realized this was enough. This quiet, peaceful moment with my family was more valuable than any viral post or perfect revenge could ever be. A few weeks later, I was cutting across the quad between classes when I spotted Chase coming from the opposite direction. My stomach tightened for a second, but then I realized I didn't feel the anger anymore, just this heavy tiredness like carrying around a weight for too long. He saw me at the same time, and we both slowed our walking pace for half a second. Our eyes met across maybe 30 feet of sidewalk, and there was this weird moment where neither of us looked away or pretended not to see each other. Chase gave a small nod, barely moving his chin, and I did the same back. Then we both kept walking in opposite directions without breaking stride or saying anything. I heard his footsteps fade behind me and felt this strange sense of closure that wasn't dramatic or satisfying, just real. We weren't friends and never would be again, but the active war was over and we could exist in the same space without everything exploding. That weekend, Uncle Mike showed up with a toolbox and a bunch of packages from Amazon. He dumped everything on the kitchen table and started pulling out new deadbolts, a doorbell camera, and some window locks. I helped him install the deadbolts first, holding the door steady while he drilled new holes and fitted the hardware. The physical work felt good, doing something concrete to protect our space instead of just worrying about what might happen next. While we worked on the front door lock, Uncle Mike brought up how being prepared was different from being paranoid. He said after everything that happened, it made sense to have better security, but we couldn't let fear run our lives, or we'd end up prisoners in our own home. I agreed and told him this wasn't about Chase specifically, just about feeling safer in general going forward. We moved on to installing the doorbell camera, which took longer than expected because the Wi-Fi kept dropping. I spent the rest of that evening updating all my privacy settings on social media, changing passwords to stuff I hadn't touched in months, and making sure my location sharing was turned off. It felt like closing doors I should have closed a long time ago. Over the next month, life settled into something that wasn't perfect, but was definitely manageable. Grandma's pill routine became normal background noise, the little alarm going off 3 times a day to remind her. The medical bills got smaller each time Chase made a payment, and between that and what insurance finally covered, we were down to an amount that didn't make my chest tight when I thought about it. I picked up enough extra shifts that I actually had some money saved for emergencies instead of living paycheck to paycheck. The house felt different now, calmer somehow, Like we'd all agreed without saying it that drama and chaos weren't worth the entertainment value. Grandma spent her evenings in her chair watching game shows, and Uncle Mike cooked dinner most nights, and I did my homework at the kitchen table. My friend group was smaller, but the people left were ones I actually trusted. People who showed up when things got hard instead of just when things were fun. I stopped checking what Chase posted or who was talking about the whole situation because it didn't matter anymore. The conduct probation was real, the payments were real, the consequences were real, and that was enough. I wasn't stuck in an endless cycle of pranks and retaliation anymore. My boundaries were clearer now, and I could focus on finishing the semester and figuring out what came next, instead of constantly looking over my shoulder. Things weren't back to how they were before because Grandma's health had changed, and I was more careful about who I let into my life, but it was good in its own way. So the moral of the story is, maybe just break up and block each other instead of starting a prank war that ends with legal fees and cardiac events. Revolutionary advice, I know. Subscribe if you want more cautionary tales disguised as entertainment. And hey, if you're planning a prank war with your roommate, maybe don't? Just a suggestion. See you in the next one, assuming nobody sues me for this video.